There's a quote by the Buddha that puzzled me a little bit for a while, and it's about lying. And he was talking to his son, Rahula, who also became a monk, and he was trying to explain to him just how serious lying was. And this comes from the sutra in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Pali Canon 61, Instructions to Rahula at Mango Stone. And he uses all these analogies about how there's really nothing upstanding left in someone who will just tell a lie without any remorse. And he says, in the same way, Rahula, when anyone feels no shame in telling a deliberate lie, there is no evil, I tell you, they will not do. Thus, Rahula, you should train yourself. I will not tell a deliberate lie, even in jest. And this is Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation. So I'm curious what shame might otherwise be translated as. Probably, no integrity. And evil, also that's another one. But I think the point is that lying is really serious, and it's sort of like a gateway drug. And lying is so prevalent these days. It's like totally normal. And I think on some level it always was totally normal and actually sanctioned by society, promoted. People often lie not to make other people feel uncomfortable or embarrassed, to encourage them maybe. That, oh, you're doing great. And oh, no, you're not. So there are some kind of virtuous reasons to tell lies, and then there's some not so virtuous reasons, like to manipulate people, to get what you want, to get more than your fair share. And then there's the legalistic view of lying, which is, well, every fact contains a set of assumptions, and there are different points of view that can be equally justified and argued on any grounds. So that, again, sort of undercuts the importance of trying to establish some truth out there. So why did the Buddha think that truth was important and lying is not such a great thing to do? Well, it's because the reason that we suffer is because we are telling ourselves lies all day long. Our minds are like fake news factories, and Venerable Chojun has talked about this many times. Basically, from the moment we're born until the moment we leave this body, we believe we exist as an inherently existent separate self, and so does everybody else. And this is really quite curious because there is so much evidence to the contrary. Like in every moment, things are changing right before our very eyes, our very ears, our very senses, tactile senses. Yet somehow the mind manages to just block it all out. And I just wonder, how much energy goes into this grand deception, because it's really, truly amazing. I mean, and there are these four main distortions that lies that we tell ourselves, that what is gross and nasty is actually appealing and pleasing, namely our body. What's always changing and falling apart is actually going to last forever. What is really unsatisfying and disappointing is actually fulfilling. And then what was born is actually the same person throughout its whole life. And I was trying to think of examples of, throughout the day. Like yesterday, I raised my arm to put on my Zen and I said, wow, that really stinks. And I was eating a piece of cake on sharing the Dharma day, and by the third bite, I was like, oh, this is not so good anymore. But then as soon as I was done, I went to get another. And then I was trying to print this 5 minutes ago, and I expected the printer to work, but it was out of toner. Well, there's impermanence. And then being surprised when I see wrinkles and like gray hair. I'm like, why is this happening? It's so silly. So how does this happen? How does the mind like play a trick on itself? So I think there's many things that go into it. First of all, our attention is distorted, and this is really a big factor in causing afflictions to arise. We selectively pay attention to certain things and blank out or blot out other things. Like, we might ignore the changing shadows on the wall, or we might ignore the fading color of a cloth. We ignore, maybe we're suddenly getting bored and restless in a relationship, but we don't want to admit it. So we just ignore it. And then we're always telling ourselves stories about who we are, to keep up this illusion that there's a self that endures throughout time. So these stories are often based on the past, on our childhood especially. Many people kind of get locked into this self-identity based on what happened to them in childhood, and it seems like almost impossible to uproot. It's very sad many times. And it's just regurgitating these things over and over and over again. It's like a cow that's chewing cud. Then we're going into the future. We're projecting ourselves existing into the future. So we're daydreaming about what we will become and what we will do, when we'll become awakened and so on. And then there's the great option of just blocking out whatever is going on and spacing out. And, all of this can happen within one meditation session. And then there's also really getting complicit with all the roles and identities society puts forth. So we really grasp onto those because they make us feel like concrete, and then other people affirm that identity, like I'm such and such a gender or a race or citizenship. And the reason I really liked to study anthropology in college is because you see other cultures have so many different ways of dividing up the world and assigning identities and roles. And so it's actually completely meaningless if you would go to some other society that didn't speak your language or didn't have the same way of conceiving human beings in their relationships to one another. And then the big one, I think this is really what prevents the mind from waking up to the truth of things, is that the afflictions are like, they're constantly running dramas and plays and movies involving the self. So it's just the anger, attachment, just arising in the mind and trying to find things to lash onto to keep you distracted. So I see anger arising, and there is no reason why I should be angry, but anger is just there. And then attachment. It's like I finally let go of being attached to one thing, and then I find myself being attached to another. And there is absolutely no good reason why I should be attached to it. So it just shows me that these are mental habits. And what they really do is keep me from waking up to the fact that my mind does not belong to me. It's always changing. I can't control it. And it's totally unsatisfactory. And thankfully, there are some things that help me to overcome these unhelpful habits. And the first one has been taking precepts. Taking precepts really helps me to challenge the self-deception I have that I'm actually happy most of the time, or that I'm content, and that I'm really kind and selfless. When an affliction arises, what precepts do is they sort of, it's like a mirror, as Venerable Kadjo has said. It helps you to see what's there, and then you have to deal with it because you can't just act it out. Craving arises, you don't just let it run so you can get satisfied and forget about it. No, you have to be like, wow, why is this craving arising? Doesn't make any sense. How can I deal with this skillfully? And then you go from there. And yes, it's usually not very comfortable, but I feel like it's one of the only ways to hold ourselves really accountable for the values that we claim to have and the ethics that we want to uphold. And then there is purification practices where we deliberately look back on our past behavior. We try to identify things that we don't feel so good about, ways that we've harmed ourselves and others. And this usually can be like sort of a, very painful, uncomfortable process, but the purification practices that were taught in Buddhism help to create this really like supportive, accepting environment where we recognize, well, that wasn't, I'm not the same person who did that, and I don't have to continue in the future. I have Buddha nature. I can always choose to do differently going forward, and I can make amends. And in that way, it's much easier to forgive ourselves and to go forward with a positive attitude. And then a really great way to challenge your self-deception is to live with a teacher and a spiritual community, because they will act as mirrors again that show you things that all your friends and relatives weren't up to showing you, because they didn't want you to stop talking to them. They didn't want me to stop talking to them, or whatever it was. And then the Dharma in general, of course, is just, especially the way the Buddha talks. He talks so straight. It's like a slap. He's like, okay, wake up. What you think makes you happy actually just brings you a lot of problems. Get with the picture. And I really appreciate that very fresh approach, because I think we do need shaking sometimes. It's really silly, and it's also really sad just how much we delude ourselves. But clearly it is something that has a lot of momentum behind it. And it takes a lot of courage to confront it. And I was really moved by what Venerable Chögyam read in the Sharing the Dharma Day this past weekend, in the chapter by Russell Coates. And I forget what was, Facing Uncomfortable Truths and Compassion. And he was saying how in order to actually reduce suffering and develop compassion, we need to face things that make us uncomfortable. And we have to be willing to let go of the delusions that we maintain in order to stay comfortable. And this is really no joke. Comfort is really important for most people. And there's no telling what a lot of people have done throughout history to maintain even a tiny little bit of comfort. So when we face it and try to challenge it, it's a very delicate, tender process. So I've learned to have a lot of compassion for myself when I do this, and also to have compassion for others. I think especially here at the Abbey, I'm very judgmental, or I can be very judgmental of other people. I forget what they're going through, how it's similar to what I'm going through. And when I do have that realization, I'm like, oh wow, I should be nothing but kind to them, because what they're doing is so incredibly amazing. So after all this reflection, I think I understand a little bit more about why the Buddha came down so hard on lying. I think people can make an argument that there's much other worse non-virtues out there. But yeah, lying is sort of like the beginning of a whole world of delusion in which ethical conduct doesn't matter, karma doesn't function, and I can do whatever I want. And that is really dangerous. So I hope to really try and be more mindful throughout the day of when I'm deluding myself, which is quite often, and to follow the examples that others have given here, such as Venerable Pende gave some very nice examples, but to really not let myself off the hook, because lying is very serious, and I can really see all the faults that follow from it.